Hi, and thanks very much for inviting me to present to you having difficult conversations. My name is Rhonda Scharf, and we're going to walk through in a very interactive way to give you all the tools to be able to have your difficult conversations in a manner that is respectful, professional, and successful. We're always going to think about everybody involved in the conversation so that people don't walk away all embarrassed, all mortified, or all angry. Because no one likes having difficult conversations. You're not the only one. The person on the receiving end doesn't like having difficult conversations either. But we know that when we avoid difficult conversations, what we end up doing is exchanging short-term for long-term ugh. So we exchange that short-term discomfort. So the more you deal with having difficult conversations, the better you will get at having them, but they're never going to be fun. You're probably never going to get really good at it because we don't want to have them all the time, right? So as we spend the next hour together, what I want you to do is we're going to do some interaction, and I want you to do a SWOT analysis as well. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So as we talk about what you need to do before your difficult conversation, what you need to say during your conversation, how you're going to position things, look for the things that are naturally a strength for you, the things that you say, I'm good at that. And that's going to help your difficult conversation be more successful. Also, think about those elements that are your threats. You're like, uh-oh, I am so not good at doing that. And knowing that those are the areas you have to be very careful about as we go through our difficult conversation so that you don't deliver it and it's not received the wrong way. We also have weaknesses and opportunities. Weaknesses are areas you're going to go, oh, I'm not very good at that, but we're going to get better at it. We're going to give you lots of solutions. And opportunities, you're like, I totally can do that. That's great. Yeah, we'll make this happen. And I want you to really think about what it's going to take to deliver a professional, difficult conversation. And of course, the first thing we need to talk about is your attitude. If you do think this is going to be horrible and a complete failure, it is. Now, the same way, it's not all that. You're not going to say it's going to be perfect and it's going to be perfect because it doesn't always go that way as well. But if you do dread it, think it's going to be horrible, the odds are that's the direction you're pushing it. But we need to have these difficult conversations. Your roles require that. So my question, we're just going to pause the video here in a second, is for everyone to be really honest with themselves and with each other. Do you avoid difficult conversations? Go ahead and pause me now. Well, good job. Most of us are yes. So hopefully you all had a chance to decide if it's yes or no. And yes, most of us do avoid them. It's not something that we look forward to doing. But regardless of where you work, 100% of us get upset at work. We get annoyed with people. So we need to have these difficult conversations so that we can go to work enjoying it, get the work done that we need. Obviously, you do very important work, whether it's a customer, a board member, a fellow employee, a member, a stranger. We run into challenging situations all the time. And sometimes we need to say things, and sometimes we don't. But it's knowing that when we do, how we're going to say them. So thinking about all of the people that you interact with your role, how many of them, and you interact with a lot, how many of them annoy you? Statistically, this is what the numbers are. For 94%, it's five or fewer. Now, if you work at a really small organization, which you don't, or a really small site, which you might, five might be all of them. So if it's 100% of the people you work with, that's a little bit of a problem. But for one person, it's only 21%. That's pretty small, right? Five or fewer, still pretty small. When you get to 6 to 10, which definitely you might be in just because of your exposure to all the people that you come into in a position of your role, it's a smaller percentage of people. And then for 2% of the people, it's more than 10. And I always say, if there's more than 10 people that you need to have a difficult conversation with, or that you find challenging, there's one thing all those 10 people plus have in common. And you're looking at it in the mirror, right? So I'm joking, but I want you to recognize if you really are running into a lot of people, there's probably more than difficult conversations that need to be addressed. And that's a subject for different webinars. But if we say, okay, I got a couple of people that kind of get under my skin, kind of annoy me. If you ask how many of them, annoy you. For 4%, how upset do you get? Sorry, how upset do you get? No, not really. This webinar, this workshop, you're like, yeah, that's helpful, but I don't really need it. When you get to 26%, they say, yeah. And so this type of workshop is very helpful. It'll give you a few ideas. By the time you get to the 40% annoyed, this is where you need this workshop. You've probably been putting it off a little bit too long, but you definitely need the tips and the tricks and the strategy to have that difficult conversation. At the end, I'm going to give you like the 4-step process, exactly, how to run this. And that's going to help you because it's enough now that it bugs you. It's enough where you say, I want to say something, I just don't know what to say. For 21% of people, they get quite annoyed. It's past time. We definitely need to have this conversation. So if you've been putting it off, you're in the right spot. And for 9%, it's extremely a problem. And we'll talk about emotions as we go through today's workshop as well. Because by the time you get to the quite and the extremely, you're emotional about the conversation. You might be angry, you might be frustrated, you might be disappointed, but all of those are emotions. And we'll talk about dealing with those emotions as well. Now, I'm not here with you, but you have 2 really great facilitators. And what I want you to do is take a little time as a team and talk about what upsets you the most. What are the type of difficult conversations that you need to have? What annoys you at work? What kind of things do you want to say? I should say something. So I'm going to pause you now, and you all have an opportunity to vent a little bit. What kind of difficult conversations do you need to have? Welcome back. Hopefully you all feel better in that you had the opportunity to vent and get things off your chest. But statistically, let me share what they are to see how close you were with where most people need to have the difficult conversations. Now, for 1%, it's personal hygiene. Now, that's typically an HR function or a manager supervisor function, which of course many of you qualify for. And if you've ever had to have the conversation about how someone smells, it is hands down the hardest conversation you need to have. I'm not going to use that as an example today because it is a pretty small percentage. But if you want to reach out to me after today's workshop, grab my email at the end or from Christina, the organizers. They'll give you my email and I'm more than happy to help you with that as well. So we'll shelve that one because most people will avoid that conversation. The next one is sometimes the email or the meeting habits or even the bathroom or eating habits. And all of those kind of fall into really, you're how old? And we often talk ourselves out of those uncomfortable or difficult conversations because we think, I shouldn't need to tell a 50-year-old to wash their hands. I shouldn't need to tell a 21-year-old to, do up their shoes or whatever. You shouldn't need to do that. So a lot of the times we do talk ourselves out of these conversations. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe these are the easier ones to have, and delivered properly, they deliver really well and you have no issues, right? So a lot of the times you're talking yourselves out of when it's good practice, and it's good to say these things if they annoy you. Where we get to the point where we need to have the conversation, and I'm sure some of the examples that you share fall into these categories, are gossip and bullying. When people are talking smack about the organization or potentially about its members or the policies, that sort of stuff, or you, I certainly am going to want to have a chat if I think that you're maybe doing any of those things. And of course, bullying, I definitely need to have a conversation with, or just a lot of personal behavior. You're too loud, you're too negative, you're too disrespectful, you're late. And why are you late? Like, don't you value my time? Like, all those kind of things fall into the other category. So regardless of what your annoyances are, they fall into these categories that we can all deal. And so if I were with you right now, I would ask you all, how many of you have had a face-to-face confrontation with another member, with a volunteer, with a coworker, with anybody within your role professionally? And all of you are going to say, well, I need to, but how many of you have actually done it? So statistically, the numbers are a little different than what my experience is. So statistically, most people say that they've approached a coworker. And my experience is when I ask that question in the room, it's about 30% of people say, yeah, I've done it, which means, 2/3 or 70% of people are avoiding it. So if you're feeling a little guilty because you've been avoiding it, you are with the masses for sure. But then when we say, okay, how'd you do it? How did you approach? 47% said, I went through another colleague. just for the record, that's not approaching a coworker with an issue. That's passive aggressive behavior. Christina, could you go tell Shannon that she needs to? No, that's not having a difficult conversation. So I'm not going to be teaching you that. Directly is what we're going to be teaching you. And for those of you that are in a supervisory or an HR position, which is another 20% of the numbers, sometimes in your role, you have to have that conversation as well. And so there's definitely, so we'll say 50%, is kind of where we're at. And involving the whole office is public shaming. And we're definitely not going to do that. So we are going to do it directly. We're going to do it professionally, respectfully, and as I said, successfully. So I want to play a game that I think a lot of you are very familiar with. I don't know what you were like in lockdown, but where I live in Canada, so we had lots of lockdown, and I ended up watching a lot of television. So 7 to 8 o'clock every night, Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. That's me as Vanna, just in case you didn't recognize me. So the way this is going to work, obviously I can't hear you. I'm going to randomly put the letters up here on this phrase. And this phrase has a lot to do with dealing with difficult people. And when you think you know what the answer is, or work amongst yourselves all together, shout it out. Now, if you're right, you're going to look unbelievably intelligent in front of this room. And if you're not right, someone else is going. Now, you'll be close, right? We'll work together. So this is a phrase. It's not a Rhonda phrase. It's a phrase that you are very likely familiar with. And it has a lot to do with the underlying principle of having difficult or uncomfortable conversations. So I know the letters that you need. And like I said, I watched Wheel of Fortune. So RSTLNE, right? E is the best letter. Let me give you some R's, pirate letter R's. S is usually a really good guess, and there is no S in this puzzle. RSTLNE. Now, where do we go? Somebody's going to be yelling at me. V. I'll give you the V. Let me give you some other letters that I know that you need. And like I said, when you think you know the answer, just shout it out. You'll look so smart. Anybody guessed it yet? I'm going to keep going. But hopefully, let me give you this letter. You need this one. Ooh, that's a good one. There we go. I'm willing to bet that somebody has it by now, or you're just playing all too shy. And let me give you the final letters, because this is my very favorite quote from Maya Angelou. People will never forget how you made them feel. In order for our difficult conversation to go well, we have to consider the other person. What you might be pointing out, they may be completely oblivious to. They didn't know. Maybe they're new to the workforce. Maybe they're just not aware of what your expectations are. Maybe they don't see a situation the way that you see a situation. So we're always going to consider them. And the goal really is, at the end of your difficult conversation, the person you have the difficult conversation with you says, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I had no idea, or I didn't know it was a problem, or I never looked at it that way. So you're not going to get that all the time. You're not going to get it most of the time, but that's really what you want. And when you do get that, you know you've done a good job in managing how they are feeling in this very awkward situation. We know we have to deliver sometimes difficult news, sometimes corrective action, sometimes no. We have to tell people things they don't want to hear. So we know that we have to be assertive in the way that we deliver. And when you look at the word assertive, this is what you get: to state positively, declare or affirm, to maintain, right, or defend. Like, do you ever look up a word in the dictionary and still not know what it means? Yeah, that's a really weird definition, right? We have to be assertive, but I don't know what that means. So I've got a working definition that I like a whole lot better. And my working definition is that I'm going to maintain my rights and needs. I'm going to take care of what I need and what I have the right to need, but I'm not going to do it at your expense. So if I'm passive, I'm not taking care of my own rights and needs. I'm letting people do things that I get annoyed with. I'm like, she's doing that on purpose. They're doing that because they know they can get away with it from me. And we feel like we've been taken advantage of. And naturally, that's a problem. When we're behaving aggressively, We are being probably very direct in our style of communication, and it's coming across as blunt and in your face. And sometimes that makes the other person feel not good, not valued, not respected. People will never forget how you made them feel, right? So I'm taking care of my needs, you take care of yours. Think about what kind of driver you are in the interstate, because most people are aggressive. You know what? Get out of my way. I'm going by. You figure out your stuff, right? What we want to be is exactly in the middle assertive. I have the right to say, this is not correct, or this is how we need to do something, or this bothers me or bothered me, or this is how I'm interpreting that. I have the right to say all of those things, but I'm not going to do it at your expense. So I'm going to stand up for my right to say what needs to be said, and I'm not going to be rude or too direct or disrespectful while I'm doing it. So that's the definition of being assertive. And somewhere on a piece of paper right now, I'd like you to draw a line that looks something like this. At one end, write the word P for passive or write passive. At the other end, write aggressive. Somewhere that's not exactly in the middle, you're going to write assertive. And we're going to figure out where you fall on these lines in different situations. Now, the reason I don't want it to be exactly in the middle is nobody is perfectly assertive, and no situation is exactly the same. The way that I'll be assertive with you as a colleague might be very different than the way that I would be assertive with a board member or a donor or a volunteer or a stranger. How I'm going to be assertive with my husband is going to be different than how I'm going to be assertive with my mother or my neighbor. So it's not like it's exactly that way, right? So if you remember, passive is we feel taken advantage of. We let them step on us. Aggressive is we protect us, don't worry about them, and they feel stepped upon potentially, although you don't really see that. But assertive is where we're both exactly in the middle. And what I'd like you to do is somewhere on that line, I'd like you to put a little X where you feel you fall at work most of the time. You're not perfect any more than I'm perfect, but most of the time, where do you fall? And I'm going to ask you not to put it exactly in the middle, because no one is perfect. And you're just evaluating your communication skills. Your coworker might put you in a very different spot, but this is where you think you are. And then I want you to put a little O on that line where you feel you fall professionally. So where you fall, personally, the X is professionally, is personally with your friends and family. So when you're not at work, when your reputation's not on the line, when you feel way more comfortable with people, where are you at? So when you look at those X's and O's, they're actually mine. This is where I would evaluate me. I am a full-time professional speaker and trainer. I work on customer recommendation, I work on referrals, and I work on relationships, and I build relationships. So let's assume I'm working with the organization and they've contracted me to come in and train a bunch of your management team on something, who knows? And so we arrange that I'm going to arrive on such and such a date and I'm going to train 25 people and it's going to cost X dollars, right? So a couple of days before I get on my airplane to leave from Ottawa, where I live, to where you are, I'm going to call up my contact. We'll just say it's Christina. And I'll say, Christina, how many people have we got signed up? And I know that we've got a maximum of 25. And she goes, just a minute, let me go check the online sign up board. And she comes back and goes, oh, holy cow, Rhonda, we actually have 28 people signed up. Ooh, I know that we agreed 25. Are you okay? Honest to goodness, I'm going to say, yes, I'm completely fine. Now, I know I have the right to say, no, we agreed to 25. I've only got 25 books. I know that I could say I could have 28, but it's going to cost you a little bit more money, but I'm not going to. So where I fall on that passive line, it's just a little past middle, and I feel fine with that. I don't think that Christine is taking advantage of me. But let's assume that I had a different client. It wouldn't be you, it's some other client, and I go into them monthly. And so monthly, the first month I say 25, how many? Oh, 28. And my contact, we'll just use the pronoun she. She does this every month. Every month she's got more people. Now I'm going to think she's doing it on purpose. And I think she's taking advantage of me. I should charge more. She's doing this on purpose, right? And so when you feel that someone is taking advantage of you, you are too far down the passive line. So if you feel that you give in too much, that people take advantage of your customer service heart, you know that having difficult conversations is hard for you because you talk yourself out of them. Now, on the personal side, my O is where I would put myself as well. And some of my family might put me higher up that line a little bit. And so that is, I have this particular disease. It's self-diagnosed. Some of you can relate to this disease. My lips, they work way faster than my brain. And I say things too quickly. And the intent is usually to be funny or to alleviate tension. And it doesn't always go there. I have a very direct style of communication. I have a dry, witty, sarcastic sense of humor that I think is hilarious. Unfortunately, not everyone values that, right? So I know that for me, I sometimes feel bad for how I said things. And I'll say, oh, I didn't mean it to sound like that, or that wasn't nearly as funny as I thought it was supposed to be, that kind of stuff. And so I'm too far up the aggressive line for me personally. So basically, when you're too far up, you're not as in tune with how your message is being received. You're much more concerned about you. I'm concerned about being funny, and I'm not as concerned. And of course, I want to change that because that's not how I want to feel. So you're going to pause this in just a second and you're going to ask where everyone is. So are you both is your X's and O's both on the passive side? Are your X's and O's both on the aggressive side, or do you straddle the middle like I do? So go ahead, pause now, and talk about where everyone's at and how you feel about that, especially for those people really well saying, nah, you're not that. So give it a second and chat about it. Okay, so we're back now. Hopefully everybody had the chance to vent a little bit. And I will say, for those of you that have both of your X's on the passive side, X's and O's on the passive side, you're going to struggle the most with trying to talk yourself out of it. You're going to get to, you're going to plan it all out and go, no, doesn't feel right. I don't need to say anything. I'm making a big hill, a mountain out of a molehill kind of stuff. Don't talk yourself out of it. You need to protect your own rights. For those of you that are straddled across the middle, it doesn't matter which is on which side, like I have. That's actually the easiest combination because when you've gone too far and when you haven't gone far enough. And for those of you that are both the X's and O's on the aggressive side, I want to say congratulations. Not for being aggressive, but for acknowledging that. A lot of people who are aggressive in nature think they are perfectly assertive because it looks like their behavior works, but sometimes it works because that's the easiest thing for people to do, but it's not the best thing for your relationship. So either way, we want to get as close to the middle for the situations as we possibly can, recognizing that when we communicate, there's so many different elements. And the experts tell us that communication has 3 components. And I'm sure you've all heard communication is not what you said. It's what the other person heard and thought you said. So the experts that give us these pie charts are wrong, in my opinion. There is a very important piece of this pie missing, other than a fork for pie. We need the words. We need to pay attention to the words, tone of voice, and body language. But the biggest piece that matters to your difficult conversation by far is your relationship. If you and I have a really good relationship, it's easier for me to have a difficult conversation with you because we both value the relationship. If you and I have a tension-filled relationship already, everything I say and do and everything you say and do is potentially going to be heard and seen out of context from a negative lens. And if we have no relationship at all, I'm immediately going to get defensive thinking, why are you having this conversation with me? So the words matter. We're going to talk about that. The tone definitely matters. The body language matters. But the relationship is the most important. So as we start talking through the 10 pieces of having a difficult conversation, the homework, the front end work, I want you to evaluate that relationship. Is everything you're saying and hearing coming through a negative lens? Because we have to be more careful in that way. Each person sees the world through their own eyes, and it affects their own interpretation. So as we do the pre-work for a difficult conversation, make sure you look at it from their perspective. And again, we're always trying to be professional, respectful, to be successful. And the first step of the pre-work, the homework work, if you will, is the first 2 steps are really what I consider to be the most important. And the first step is the ability to exactly define what the problem is. Often we have avoided this difficult conversation for so long. We're trying to figure out what to say. We're trying to make it perfect. We're trying to do everything right. By the time we have it, we've worked up a bit of emotions and we vent. Well, then you did this, and then this happened. And remember when this happened, we've already talked about this. And what about, we end up venting. So you have to be able to pull down the situation from whatever bigger situation you have down to one sentence. If you can't do that, you're not clear on what the issue is. Now, when I offer coaching on this type of thing, I will make them email me the situation. I'll say, give me 4 pages of vent if you want, but then bring it down to one sentence. What is the issue? So let's play with an issue, just a pretend issue that I made up. And if this sounds like something you're dealing with, I promise you this wasn't given to me as an issue. Just based on my conversations, this is sort of something I thought we could all relate to. So Jordan is an AmeriCorps member who doesn't appear to be committed to their responsibilities. They frequently show up late, express annoyance with the tasks assigned to them, and are negatively chatty with the other members about how, sorry, I should have changed volunteers to members, about how they would fix the organization if they were in charge. In the past, when you've tried to talk about some of your frustrations with Jordan, they are filled with excuses and they seem overly defensive and argumentative. Any conversation impacts no behavior whatsoever, and you feel like you've wasted your time. So you're thinking about the situation as we work through today's workshop. And if we go back to the first step is, what is the issue? Now, as you can tell with this particular scenario, there's a lot of potential issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask that we pause the video here. As a group, you're going to brainstorm as many different issues as you think are in this situation. I brainstormed beforehand and I came up with 9. So before you come back to me, see if you can come up with at least 9, go for 10 issues that are apparently things that we can talk about. We're not going to talk about them all. What are the separate issues? So go ahead and pause me and good luck. Okay, how'd you do? Did you come up with at least 9? So here's what I came up, that if I want to have a conversation with Jordan, these are the things that I could potentially have the conversation about. These are the things that I perceive as potential issues. Lack of commitment on Jordan's part, showing up late, annoyed at the tasks that they're being asked to do, complaining about the way things are done, or about how other people are doing things. So the negativity, defensive and argumentative. I'm looking at my notes. They seem unhappy. There's no change to behavior when we've talked about it before. Maybe they're not clear on the expectations. And maybe the issue is they're not representing the organization well. That's just quick. That's quick. I think that's 9. If I count them there, it looks like 9 to me. And you probably came up with more. Now, I'm not going to deal with all of these situations when I have a conversation with Jordan. I'm going to pick one of them. Because if we have too much, it sabotages the focus of the conversation. They don't know what you're trying to say. And that's often why you don't get change in behavior, why you don't get the results that you're looking for. Which takes us directly to the second step. What are the results that you're looking for? So begin with the end in mind. Again, this is the pre-work before your difficult conversation, right? I don't like the word homework, but you know what I mean. It's the pre-work. So obviously this comes from Dr. Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. When you are finished this conversation, what is the result you're looking for? So what are you hoping to achieve? So don't worry about solutions. We're going to get there. But you want to say, okay, when I'm done having a conversation with Jordan, what do I expect them to do differently? What do I expect them to say? How do I expect them to handle the situation? Are you looking for an apology? Are you looking for a commitment to being on time, or being aware that they're not meeting expectations? Or maybe we need to have a conversation about expectations, right? And where most people go wrong is those two things are not aligned. So we say the issue is Jordan's negative behavior, but at the end of the conversation, I'm hoping they switch their attitude. Are they aligned? Or I'm hoping they stop complaining about tasks, or they show up on time, or they stop trying to act like they know more than everybody else, or whatever it is. And are the two of them aligned? And that's where most people go wrong. Like, think about any argument you've had with your partner in life. You may be arguing about the socks on the floor, but in reality, you feel like you're being treated like the maid. So if we're really arguing about my husband's socks on the floor, which just for the record, we don't, but if we were having that, stereotypical conversation, I might be saying, pick up your socks. And he's thinking, it's socks, who cares? But really what I'm upset about is I feel like I'm supposed to be picking them up. And that's really what the issue is how I feel when he leaves the socks on the floor. So you want to make sure that the two of them are really aligned. So I'm going to ask you this question. What is your goal with Jordan? When we're done this conversation, what do we expect to happen? What results are you looking for? So you probably want to pause this video at this point as well and talk about what your goal is, and then circle back to what you personally identified as the issue and ask yourself, are they aligned? And if they're not, then we either need to change the issue or change the goal. So what I want your teams to create right now is an issue and a goal that is completely aligned. Go ahead. Okay, that probably took a little longer than you thought it would take, right? And this is where most people are going wrong. Are they aligned? So take your situation and share it with, someone else and say, what do you think will happen at the end of me saying this is what the situation is, or me having this conversation? What goal am I going to get? So you want to make sure that they're aligned. It does take time. So this is why it's homework. This is why you may need to work with a fellow member when you're setting up a difficult conversation, or emailing me going, Rhonda, am I on the right track? So that you can do all of that. Let's go to the third step. The third step is ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions of yourself about your assumptions, everything. If we go back to this situation with Jordan, we are assuming that Jordan is lacking in commitment. Maybe not. Maybe Jordan just doesn't know what's expected. And we're assuming Jordan knows what's expected when perhaps they've never been told. So we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions about, is it my expectations that are off? Am I expecting something that isn't reasonable? Do we maybe just need to have a conversation about expectations, and it doesn't need to be that difficult? So you want to ask yourself a lot of questions. You also want to take this step as a two-part step. You also want to get prepared for your difficult conversation and have a lot of questions that you can ask them. Now, when we get to the how you structure the conversations, asking questions is really important. You will be amazed at how little talking is required for a difficult conversation. It's not a lecture. It's a conversation back and forth. So we want them to talk. So I want you to have prepared at least 6 questions that you can ask your person in your difficult conversation. So they need to be open-ended questions, not closed. So closed-ended questions are answered with yes, no, or a one-word answer kind of stuff, right? Are you happy? No. Do you see any problems? No. Do you know why I asked to talk to you today? No. Those are all close-ended questions. So we want to ask open-ended questions. You're looking for more information. And as we get into the setup, this is how I often start my conversation. So get to know a little bit about their perspective. So here's what I want your teams to, this is an interactive workshop in case you didn't know. I want your teams to create at least 6 questions that you could ask Jordan. They don't have to be completely aligned with what your goal is or what the issue is. You could start by saying, Jordan, tell me what you like about working here. Or Jordan, what is your favorite part of being an AmeriCorps member? And, let them talk, and you may find out information. So if I were to say, what is your favorite part about being an AmeriCorps member? And Jordan says, nothing. I hate every bit of it. Well, let's talk about that then. Can you get, and then sometimes it opens the door, right? Sometimes when we have our, I'm going to go back and I'm going to pause, and I'm going to let you create a list of 6 questions. So pause me here now. Now we continue. I just get too excited. I get too excited because what you will probably have talked about, I previewed the slide to you, is that emotions are pretty common here. And so they're your emotions and they're Jordan's emotions or the other person's emotions. And the reality is the reason it's a difficult conversation is because we care. First of all, you're in a very caring profession, right? Doing all that you do requires a heart, and it wouldn't be a difficult conversation if you didn't care. I'm not particularly fond of my neighbor that lives right there. And so when we have to talk about things, it's not a difficult conversation. I'm polite, respectful. I don't need to be professional. It's in my personal life, but I'm polite and respectful in all of that. We don't argue about things, but it's not that hard for me to have that difficult conversation because I'm not emotionally involved. The reason it's difficult is when I do need to have a difficult conversation. So if I needed to have a difficult conversation with a board member about how they are asking questions on the board or how they're challenging everything that's brought forward, I do care about how they see me, about how this conversation goes. And that's where the emotions come in. And they come in for both of you. You can imagine the other person is embarrassed, ashamed, confused, scared. Like there's all kinds of emotions that would come there. And there are three typical emotions that we experience, both us and the person in our difficult conversation. And the first emotion that we experience is the most common. And it's just the total blank out of your brain. You just freeze. So, let's say you're Jordan, and I say, Jordan, what is it that you love about working here? What's your favorite part? And you just go, you sort of get the deer in the headlights look, right? That's the most common one. And then, of course, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you come up with the right answer. I jokingly say to my husband, I do my best work in bed at 3 in the morning when you're sound asleep because I wake up and go, oh, I should have said. And that's just because the emotions, the adrenaline is blocking our brain from working, right? The fight or flight, it's get me out of here. I want out of this conversation. And you can expect, especially people that don't have a lot of business experience, some of your members potentially, they feel that way. They don't know what they're supposed to say. If you're looking about colleagues, like if you're a manager or supervisor and you're dealing with an employee, they're all of a sudden afraid that their job is on the line, right? You're dealing with a board member or a donor and you're concerned about the impact. So that fear, that deer in the headlights look happens to all of us. The next response is the second most common, and it's a defensive or negative reaction, which Jordan was doing in the example that we're using. And so this is where they typically fight back or they push back. Sometimes they yell, they get very defensive, like, what are you talking about? I'm not getting paid to do this. Why would you even? And they get very defensive in their behavior, right? And naturally, when someone gets yelling at me, tend to yell back, right? So we want to make sure that we're not yelling back. And then the third one is also common. It is a little more gender specific, and I hate that it is, but it's the crying. And I promise that when we cry, for those of you that have ever cried in a situation, you were not sad. You were so frustrated in this moment that this was an issue, that you couldn't find the words that you wanted to say, or you couldn't say what you wanted to say because you would lose your job or your reputation or anything like that. So the crying, the yelling, the blanking out is a pretty standard response. I'm going to ask you in a second what you think yours is at work. Now, I teach this. I've been teaching this for 30 years, so I'm pretty good. But when I do default, it does depend situationally. Sometimes professionally, I blank out. I'm just almost shocked going, we're really having this conversation. Wow, didn't see this coming. However, in my personal life, when it's my husband, I will move to the yell a whole lot faster. When I was a lot younger, I did the crying. I don't cry anymore. I just get really mad. And so, but whatever it is, so you want to make sure that you, in any of those situations, you take time to breathe. We need oxygen at this point. Give the other person time to breathe. If they blank out or they start crying, give them a minute. What you shouldn't do is call attention to what they're doing. So don't say, you're crying, do you want a Kleenex? Just pretend you don't notice it, because I promise you at this moment, they're mortified. So just ignore the emotions. Sometimes when they're yelling, I feel the need to identify, we need to lower our voice. I'm not going to say something like, don't yell at me. So we want to breathe. We want to take time. If it's your emotions you're dealing with, that's why you're going to bring notes in front of you. You're going to be prepared for this. Hopefully they're prepared, but they likely don't have notes in front of them for this conversation. So we're going to be patient. And if it really falls apart, then we're going to reschedule. And we're going to say, you know what, let's continue this conversation another day. And just don't let it disappear, because some people do this stuff on purpose so that they get out of the difficult conversation. So I want to know What is your typical reaction? You're going to pause me in just a second. We're just going to take a straw poll from everyone in the room. How many of you do the blank out? And I'm thinking at work, of course. I'm not thinking about at home, but generally, if you had to pick one of these three, do you blank out? Do you yell? Do you get defensive? Or do you cry? Go ahead and pause me now. All right, welcome back. Hey, we all feel that way, right? So the reality is the people that we're having the difficult conversation with also run into these emotions, probably a little more than we do, because they are typically less prepared than we are for this difficult conversation. So as a professional, we have to be comfortable with silence. So sometimes it looks like they're just blanking out, but what's really happening is like, it's the duck paddling underwater. They're just completely doing this, trying to figure out what to say. Their brain's moving at 100 miles an hour. Sometimes people use silence as a manipulation technique. So we're going to be patient. I'm going to say, give them 10 full seconds. And I'm actually going to count out 10 seconds for you in silence. And I want you to mentally acknowledge, where did you feel uncomfortable? Where was it that you would feel the need to say something? So I'm going to say, are there any questions? And then I'm going to count out the 10 seconds and you're going to follow along with me. And these are legit seconds. Any questions? And now, I know that probably a few of you were like, at 3, you would have said something. Definitely by 6, most people would have jumped in. So when we're having a difficult conversation, we have to be patient. We have to give the other person time to think. They're not in the same situation you are. But if I just said, give them 10 seconds, you go, any questions? Okay, then, because we're anxious, we've got adrenaline running. Make sure you give them time. And if 10 seconds doesn't seem enough, go to 20, because you give them enough time, they will say something every time. Now, doing the job that you do, it's a very heartfelt job, as we talked about. And naturally, we're always going to preserve the relationship, regardless of their involvement with the organization. Employee, colleague, member, board member, donor, stranger, not even from the state. We're always going to preserve the relationship, which is why we want to prepare for our difficult conversation. If we rely on ourselves just to deliver it off the cuff, we got a pretty good chance we're going to say something a little not quite the way that we want to say it. And for those of you that are in a management or a supervisory position, you have to be predictable and consistent. If you're going to have one conversation with a member about something, you have to be ready to have it all. So take notes so that you can do it the next time. You do need to choose your time and place wisely. So we need to be professionally respectful. For those of you in HR, that's why people are always afraid of when HR calls them Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. They're like, I'm getting fired. So you want to be alone. You want to make sure that you're private. You're doing it face to face as much as possible. If you can't do it in person, do it on a video conference. Avoid the telephone, avoid the email like the plague. Email never goes well. You use email after the conversation to summarize what you talked about, but don't use it to have the conversation. But be aware of other people. Just pulling them off to the side saying, can we talk over here? No. You want to schedule an appointment. You want to do it privately where people aren't watching going, what's going on in there? And choose your time and place wisely. You can't avoid it. You do need to start with a direct approach. Say, you know what, Mary, I'd like to talk to you about X, or Bill, can we talk? I feel a little uncomfortable with what happened yesterday, but make an appointment. Don't avoid it. Be authentic. And most definitely you need to practice. Maybe you need to work with somebody else. Nobody likes the words role play, right? But maybe you need to work with another colleague and say, I need to have a difficult conversation with so-and-so. Would you be willing to walk me through it? And if you can certainly do this difficult conversation as an exercise for the group here now, but I want to make sure that you know that practicing having notes in front of you is completely fine. It's just to prompt you to get you, if you do get that blank out, you've got something to look at and go, oh yeah, this is a question I could ask, and you're back prepared. Anxiety is real. It's going to block your memory. That's what fight or flight does, right? So practice. Now, we're going to make an appointment. We're going to say, can we talk? Whatever appointment looks like. Don't say, I'd like to talk to you about your bad behavior. No, just say, can we talk? And maybe we talk now. Maybe we say, can we go for coffee at the end of the day? Like, you figure out what feels right for the relationship. Don't make it all official. Like, it doesn't, I need you to come into my office. We need to have a conversation. No, it doesn't need to be like that. But you do need to have it, right? And you do want to be respectful for where you have it. And in many situations, you want to give them a heads up that you're about to have it so that they can come prepared as well. So we're meeting for coffee. We're going to talk. Maybe it's an annual performance review. Maybe it's right after the meeting saying, you know what, stay here. Let's hold on a second. Let's talk a little bit. And we're going to use the acronym SAGE. And so it's an acrostic, actually. And so SAGE, I made this up. It's a 4-step process, and you can kind of see the answers that are coming. SAGE is all about how we're going to structure this conversation. Now, SAGE means wise. That's why I picked those letters. It also means green, but we're going with the wise. And so each letter obviously starts the tip. And the first one, as you can see, is state the situation. This is typically your opening line. You can also open with the A, but I couldn't find a 4-letter word that started with A that was so good as sage. Sage was good, right? So we're going to state the situation. This is your opening line. What you're looking to do is just open the conversation. You're not looking to create defensive behavior. So you're going to stay away from trigger words such as always and never. I'd like to talk to you about why you're always late for the team meetings. I'm not always late. So we're not looking to attack. We're not looking to create defensive behavior. We're looking to almost start with what I call a vanilla phrase. And a vanilla phrase is for them to kind of go, okay, they don't really know where you're going. We've not put the issue on the table. We're not having a big conversation. So if we go back, we are having a big conversation, but we're not having it in the first line. So if I go back to Jordan, I'm not going to say, Jordan, I brought you here today because I want to talk about your commitment to the organization. What's Jordan likely to do? Get all defensive, right? Like, what are you talking about, my commitment to the organization? Or so you want to have an opening line that's pretty vanilla. You're going to follow all of the communication skills that you've learned over the years. You're going to use I language. So I'd like to talk. I need to say, I want, I think, I hear, I need, I feel, any of those things versus you should, you have to, you need to, you must, or you said. So anytime I start a sentence with you, I can almost guarantee that I'm going to get a defensive reaction. You were really loud in today's meeting. No, I wasn't. Like, so no, I'm not going to start off with something like that, right? So we're going to use I language. Now, this is a conversation, right? Back and forth. So the S also stands for shut up or stop talking. So open up the sentence and then sometimes open up the conversation. And then sometimes it just goes on its own. Now, here are some examples. I'm not a really big fan of memorized content, but make it sound like you. None of these sound like me. I have something I'd like to discuss with you about our policies. Those words would never come out of my mouth. And I'd say, you know what? I want to talk to you about something. We've got an issue with a policy. Or I'd like to make sure that our expectations on each other are clear. I'm going to make it sound like me, right? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about what would be your opening line to start a conversation with Jordan. So pause the video, talk about it, and say, we're sitting down at across the table. I'm going to start. Of course, we're going to assume the hi, how you doing? How's life? How's the kids? Yeah, all that is gone. We're opening the issue. What is your opening line? Go ahead and pause me now. Okay, so hopefully you've got lots of different options, right? And basically you're going to say your opening line and then stop talking, right? Now, as I mentioned, you can also start with the A, which is typically what I do. So the A is about asking a question to get the conversation started. So you could do a statement like the S states, or you could open the conversation with a question like, Jordan, do you know why I brought you here today? by the way, is probably not a really great question because they're going to be like, why? What happened? What do I know? So I'm not going to get all opinionated. I'm not going to create anything that's going to cause them to be defensive either. So I'm going to ask a question, doesn't have to be tied with what my goal is, but I'm going to ask a question that is relevant to the conversation that we're going to have. When I ask the question, remember, I'm going to stop talking. I'm not going to interrupt them. I'm going to learn as much as I can because this is a learning stage. So again, like I typically start with questions, and this is part of the reasons I wanted you to have those 6 questions ready to go. So as a team right now, you can say, you know what, one of those 6 questions was actually a really good starting question. So let's start with that. And then you may go back and forth with conversation with the questions a little bit. They may have something they want to talk to you about. It may open the door to conversation. And so your questions are going to get more and more finely tuned with what the issue is, but you're going to start and be ready to get there. So, have you ever had an experience like this before? Have you ever had a one-on-one conversation with a supervisor before? Why do you think I brought you here today? Some of those are closed questions, but I'm going to open them up because what you want to do is get to the G, and the G is where you affirm the goal. So when we talked about begin with the end in mind, that is your sort of your end space, what you think is going to happen. And you want to make sure those two are aligned. But your goal might be that Jordan becomes a very valued member of the team, that we make appropriate changes so Jordan can be whatever the goal is, right? So the goal, you're not going to say, Jordan, my goal here is that you ship up or shape out. You're not going to do that. But what are you trying to achieve together? So my job is to ensure that we're both really happy. My job is to ensure that we're both on the same page. I really want this to be a positive experience for you and for us. I want the board to work well. I want our donors to feel valued. I want the public to know how important they are to us. That's why I'm talking to you today. All of those are the goals, right? Because you've been listening all along, you want to acknowledge anything that they've said. Feed it back, show them that you've heard their point of view. Does not mean you agree with it. It just means, okay, I see where you're standing. Another one of those 7 habits of highly effective people is seek first to understand and then be understood. So we're going to feed back. We're going to make sure that we're not sounding judgmental. We're not accusing them of anything, and that we really are working here together. This is a conversation. So we want to engage them in the solution. Let's find a solution that works for both of us. What do you think we should do? How are we going to fix this? What are your ideas? If you were in my shoes right now, what would you recommend we do? And so you are going to go in the conversation with a solution ready that you're prepared to deal with, but it doesn't mean that's the one that you're going to end up with, because what you're going to do is work together. So it really is a conversation. It's not a lecture. This is not ship up or you're fired kind of stuff. That's a totally different kind of conversation, right? So let's work together so that we're both on the same page. But I know it's still way easier to procrastinate. So you know that every brilliant idea is absolutely fascinating and absolutely useless unless you choose to use it. This stuff works. Does it always work? No. Because if there's one thing that I know, you cannot control anyone else's behavior. I can't control Jordan any more than you do. I can talk to them until I'm blue in the face. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to get change. But I know that avoiding it definitely won't give me change. I have to be willing to have the difficult conversations. I have to be prepared. I have to be structured, and I have to be clear. If I am those things, I'm going to be way more successful in having the difficult conversation. Don't avoid them. Apply the information. It's not always going to work. Like I said, we don't always get the right solution the first time. So every time you have a difficult conversation, debrief it and say, if I had to do that all over again, what would I do differently? Because eventually you're going to get the situation where you walk away going, you know what? That went well. And then ask yourself, What did I do to make it go well? Because you will be successful. So I wish you the very best of luck. Do not ever hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. And if you'd like weekly motivational tips to help you do your job and be more successful, please feel free to send me an email with subscribe in the subject line. I'll sign you up for my weekly newsletter, and you can unsubscribe anytime. You'll find me all over social media, every platform, and I'm here to help you. Best of luck, and you've got this. Thanks.